Hey, what's going on, guys? So I'm going to do a quick little video, or really a set of videos on the V-60, non-invasive positive pressure unit, just commonly called BiPAP for slang, but it really, gives us the ability to do a variety of different applications of non-invasive positive pressure, so mask or prongs, things like that. So this first video here is going to talk about the different connections and capabilities of this machine, or that'll take us to the circuit, and then how to make sure you got the correct settings in as far as your leak port and mask if you got a built-in leak and things like that. Right, and then I'm going to do a separate one about initial settings and modes and making changes and all that stuff here. Okay, so the V-60 is probably one of the more common units you'll see. There's a V-60 Plus. It's got a couple of upgrades that this one does not. Both pretty similar. You're going to see these things kind of all over the place. They're really a great addition to this thing's predecessor, the Vision. All right. So the beauty of the V60s is you can initiate non-invasive positive pressure in the emergency room, and because it's got transport capabilities with battery and this oxygen switchover system I'm going to show you, we can initiate therapy to the patient, transport them to a different level of care without having to disrupt the help the receiver or anything like that. So let's talk about the different connections here first. Let me disconnect a couple of things here. So in the back of this unit, let me see, I'm going to zoom out just a little bit here. You can see we have a 50 psi O2 source going to this machine and nothing else. So this machine has a digital blender, okay, meaning we can set a precise FiO2, and all the gas that's coming out of this is going to be premixed to whatever we digitally set. So unlike some of the ventilators you might notice, once again, we only have the oxygen. We don't have a medical air 50 psi connect. What this machine does, there's filters underneath. It's like a big blower motor. It's going to pull in filtered room air to dilute us down to whatever FiO2 and kind of help with that overall flow delivery. All right. So depending on what machine you have, because I've had rentals that don't have this next piece here, I can't really move my camera a whole lot because I'm working on short connections. But if you look, this is a little mini O2 manifold. So all this is, I have 3 different 50 psi sources, and it's tough to see that bottom one here, okay? But I have 3 different 50 psi or high pressure O2 lines going to this little gas block, and then from this gas block, 50 psi going to the machine. On the long one right here, all right, I have just a simple little quick connect for popping into the wall and accessing 50 psi, whatever room I'm in. Then you notice I have 2 other little 50 psi pigtails that are much shorter. And what these are is for transport, okay? You can't really see on this machine, but down low on each side there is a tank holder that'll take an e-medical cylinder for oxygen, okay? And we can access that 50 psi hub on those tanks for this. What's cool is I can go ahead and pop this into the wall here, as I'm going to do. And you notice I popped into 50 psi, and I got no gas leaking through. These have a check valve, so gas can only go in one way. So these don't need to be sealed prior to hooking into your 50 psi. And it's important to remember. One thing I'll tell you is, this manifold is just very simplistic. It's not going to know exactly, a whole lot about what it's hooked up to or anything like that. Whenever I'm using this in a patient's room, I generally will only run off the wall outlet. I make sure my tanks are disconnected. And whenever I'm getting ready for transport, then I hook up. And that makes sure that my tanks haven't been depleted. Whenever I am transporting a patient with one of these, I only run 1 tank at a time, okay? And a lot of that is if I'm working in an emergency room, I'm always keeping full tanks on this thing. If I have 2 tanks, there's that tendency for this thing to pull equally from each side, and now I have 2 half-empty tanks, all right, rather than just depleting one. So I keep a close eye on my pressure gauge, and I just have 1 hooked up. Once I'm running low or getting past my safety zone or comfort level zone, I'll hook up the other one, and I'll kind of disconnect, or you can continue to run the other one down, okay? So when I'm done with my transport, I disconnect these, make sure I'm not losing my gas. If you don't have this little manifold, that's fine. You just have your 50 psi hooked up. You'd have to be very, very quick at removing your quick connect and hooking onto a tank. There'd be a brief disruption possibly in that FiO2 delivered. If you got this manifold system, it makes transitioning from tank to wall and back and forth very seamless, and it's great. All right, power-wise, we do hook this up to wall power. Even though this thing has a pretty sophisticated battery life, you're going to want to go ahead and plug that into the red outlets that are served by the generator in the hospital. I already got ours plugged in here. Pretty much got a little fan that just filters the air and cools the computer board. And then to actually access that big HEPA filter underneath this thing that filters all that gas, you'd actually have to remove this from the stand itself and everything. If you look down low, I'm going to show you just how to do a dry circuit here, but once again, those are 2 little tank trolleys. If you're doing heated wire, which I'll kind of elaborate on a little bit in this video, but we're going to stick to a dry single limb circuit, or all these are going to have single, but I'm going to show you dry. You got a little heater block right here where you could slip in pass over heated base unit and kind of hook up everything from there. Nothing really changes from anything else you already know about heated wire. So I'm hooked up to 50 psi. I'm hooked into my wall power. You can see I got little icons here showing me that I'm hooked up on the wall power. I'm trickle charging my battery. Let's talk about circuits. So this unit uses all single limb circuits. So this is what we call a dry circuit. All right, meaning no heated humidification. Great for initial application and transport purposes. I use these in the emergency room. But once I get a patient stabilized and moved to where their temporary home's going to be in the hospital, I do like to get them switched over to heated humidification. Okay, not a big change. It's just one little pit stop and a different looking heated wire circuit, taking a short tube to the top of the passover. All right, and I'll do that one maybe in a separate video. There's only one gas outlet on this machine, and that's this fitting right here. Okay, and pretty much if you look at this, okay, that's a 22 millimeter outer. What I'll tell you is, really most of the device we talk about, almost every device from here on out, in regards to positive pressure, the first thing you're going to want to do is place a simple little viral bacteria filter on that gas outlet. If it doesn't go on, remember, it's respiratory fittings, turn it, slide right on. Okay, if it doesn't go on, maybe you need to stop and ask yourself, is what you're trying to put on supposed to? All right, so all the gases coming out of this machine is going to be filtered. Got this single limb circuit here, so I'm just going to hook up on the other end. A lot of these circuits, if you're buying them from Respironics, do come with the filter pre-attached. All right, but always good to kind of check. So we got this big, long single limb circuit, and we're going to be hooked up to kind of a tighter fitting mask here, something like this. All right, it's going to seat on the face very, very snugly, make a tight seal so we can push that pressure into the lungs. The thing you have to remember with a single limb circuit or any of these devices as we move forward, not only how's gas going to a patient, but how is that patient able to exhale? And with the single limb circuit, we'd have a problem with the patient rebreathing that gas and rebreathing CO2, and that would be bad from a respiratory and keeping a patient alive perspective. So we always need an exhalation port. We usually just call this a whisper, although it goes by a bunch of different names, but simply put, it's for exhalation. If you look here really, really closely, and you probably can't see in the video, there's tiny little holes inside of that exhalation port, and this machine maintains an intentional baseline leak to flush out that exhaled carbon dioxide. All right, so this always needs to go between the circuit and the patient. If you had this flip-flopped and back here for some reason, weren't thinking, that patient would be rebreathing through this 4 or 5 foot long circuit, and that would be a bad thing. All right, so this is always going to hook up distal to that circuit and proximal to that patient's mask or interface. So this machine is going to allow us to set a precise level of airway pressure to maintain in the circuit. Okay, so for it to be able to operate, we do need to be able to tell it how much pressure is being generated at that patient connection. So this is a proximal pressure line, so it's hooking up right before the patient interface and allows us to direct those pressure readings back to the machine. So if you look, this kind of looks like oxygen tubing, but it's not. It's a little bit thicker. All right, doesn't have the same standard kind of disconnections and stuff, so you couldn't hook it up wrong, hopefully. All we're going to do is hook back up on this little silver port on the machine, and it's just a little slip fit. And voila, we're good. Okay, so that is the circuit here. Once again, this is just a dry circuit. I'll maybe talk a little bit about heated wire circuits in another video, but nothing really changes. You have a short dry length of hose going to the top of a passover, and then heated wire circuit coming off of that. Okay, still have a pressure line, still have your exhalation port, just looks a little bit of a different circuit. So let's go ahead and turn this thing on. So this machine is touchscreen, as well as it's got some button capabilities here along the periphery. One thing I don't like about ours is, and all these, is it starts with gas blowing through it, and it's not in standby. So if you look down here, and I'm going to try and get a little bit closer so you can maybe see better. All right, couple of things. Let me lock these wheels so it doesn't roll away from me. I'm trying to get out of that screen glare. First things first, second most important button besides power, this top left-hand screen, alarm silence. That's going to pre-silence any alarms as well as cancel out any current ones that continue to flash. They just don't beep at me. Down low, this is where you're going to access like your settings, your modes, alarms. There's also another important button called standby. I'm going to go ahead and hit the standby, and then that stops. Now, keep in mind, if you had this on a patient or if it sensed an occlusion, it's not going to allow you to go into standby until you've removed that from the patient. It's going to sense that seal, all right? So it'll tell you waiting for patient, and then it'll let you know once it's disconnected from patient, it goes ahead and kicks you back to the standby screen. From here, it's a lot easier to access your settings and things like that without this thing honking at you. All right. If at any point we were to hook this back up to a patient, though, or recover it, and it senses that occlusion, it's going to think the patient's triggering or trying to initiate a breath and startup. Also, we could hit the restart if we were trying to initiate ventilation. What I want to kind of show you guys here is something that you know, a lot of people overlook, and this machine is great because we don't have to do a test on every single circuit if we're buying Respironics stuff, but it is important to go ahead and double check and make sure you got the correct settings for your exhalation port and your mask by accessing the menu down here, okay? So it's hard to see, but this one right next to standby in between modes, standby is menu. So I always double check this and just make sure everything is correct. Pretty much once we get rolling on this thing, it's going to give us some estimated values, leak, tidal volumes, and things like that. For this machine to give us the most accurate data, specifically for that leak, all right, because this machine will compensate for a leak, but we're going to be adjusting this mask fit to get an appropriate leak value, all right. It's important that we have the correct exhalation port and mask setting chosen. Otherwise, we could be tightening a mask down on somebody thinking we got a huge leak when really it's tight as can be and the leak is just coming through the exhalation port and the machine doesn't realize that. So you're just going to go to mask port. All right, and this is where you get a real big benefit if you're, so this machine's made by Phillips Respironics. If you're buying their stuff, you don't actually have to do a physical test on anything. You're just confirming that you have the correct settings. So if you buy their mask, if you look, this is a nice Phillips Respironics non-invasive positive pressure mask here. You got an you can see our little patient hookup right here. A lot of people think this is an exhalation port. It's not. It's an anti-asphyxia port. But pretty much there's a number on all of their mask, and that number 1 right there, it lets us know what leak setting is coming from the mask, if there's any at all, okay? So there's also all sorts of different stuff, 1 through 4, I believe. You can see some of these other ones have it too, all right? Even though this thing relatively seals and it's not capable for exhalation, so when this mask is running, this little anti-asphyxia valve on here is a little flap, that pressure is going to push up against this little seal here. There could still be a small leak, and the machine's going to know that what leak is coming out in different centimeters of water for every elbow we select, okay? So I just simply look on my mask, and in this case I choose 1. If I was using 2, it's a touch screen, I can keep going ahead and choose anything 1 through 4. Let's say I don't buy Respironics mask, and I don't know if my mask has an exhalation port built in or a leak or whisper or anything like that. By going to other, I can hit other, and I can use it, but it lets you know that hitting accept is going to result in that total leak and not saying specific patient leak from the interface. And we might be flying blind, so we don't know what's coming out of the mask. We don't know what the actual leak is possibly. Okay, maybe nothing at all, but it takes away that validity of that number sometimes. Big benefit of buying their stuff. So let's say I'm going to go with a mask 1 here. I'm going to go ahead and hit accept. And then the other thing we got to account for is the exhalation port, because it's going to have a baseline leak, so air is always being purged out of there at any given time. Another major benefit of choosing Respironics circuits, okay, and pretty much on their software they have all these different options chosen, and it knows how much of a leak comes out of this. So pretty much you're looking at what exhalation port you have on your circuit, okay, and you're looking to see if you have one that looks like that here. So you can see this is a whisper swivel, so kind of an older one. So if I had that on my circuit, I go ahead and hit accept, and it knows exactly how much leak is coming out of there, and I'd have to do nothing more. I'm going, okay, well I don't have that one. The DEP is a disposable exhalation port. All these are disposable, in fact, but that's what they call these. If you look at it, mine looks similar, but not really. This is what's called an FEP, or filtered exhalation port. Great in times of COVID or other illnesses. It allows you to hook up a simple bacterioviral filter or a more sophisticated HEPA filter or something like that if you really wanted to on that exhalation port to kind of, as a mitigation strategy for transmitting diseases to healthcare providers and around the room and things like that. So It looks like it, but not exactly, so I'm going to go ahead and skip through. All right, yeah, this one, definitely not. And then if I'm not 100% sure that my exhalation port is exactly what is shown on the screen here, even though this might be very similar to the old school DEPs, or if you had a circuit not built by Respironics, you can go ahead and go other, and it's going to have you test that exhalation port, because if we didn't do this, this is going to be where the most chance of a massive leak coming out is going to be. All right, so what we do is take a glove, thumb, or finger, or respiratory cap, and put it on there. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and accept it. It's going to tell me occlude circuit. Don't include the exhalation port, and you can see I accidentally hit the exhalation port, and it freaked out. I thought the patient was maybe trying to trigger a bunch of things happening. So I'm going to go ahead and include and hit start test. I'm going to hold this nice and firm. And it's just pressurizing and making sure that exhalation port works. Once that says passed, all right, I'm good to go. I could go ahead and start ventilation. If it failed, I would make sure I'm hooked up properly, make sure you got your exhalation port and that pressure line kind of tied back in and everything like that. Make sure you had a good seal. Make sure you weren't blocking up where the gas is actually coming out and hit repeat. In this case, we passed. I'm going to go ahead and hit start ventilation, and I'm going to go straight back to standby. Okay. So once again, you do not have to do any actual physical test if you're buying Respironics stuff. You're just verifying what settings you have on your exhalation port and your mask, and that's going to give us the most accurate value for our patient leak when we're trying to decide if we need to tighten an interface and so on. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and turn this on here really quickly. Start ventilation. I'm going to hook up to a test lung so it's not breathing on its own or anything like that. You can notice as soon as I hook up, it's going to go ahead and start ventilating and giving gas. What I tell all my students is this thing is not just an annoying machine that's going to alarm. You can see low priority in yellow. It's going to make that little beep beep. It's going to let us know what happened here, and it's going to show us low minute ventilation, low tidal volume. All right, so it's going to show us what is going on with the machine here. I can go ahead and hit alarm reset to clear any of those active alarms. If they're continuing to go on, I'm going to get this here. We're not really focusing on settings or monitoring or making adjustments just yet. I just want to show you these alarm tabs, okay? Because a lot of students, when they do this competency, can get a little nervous and have some things happen. I'm going to show you a couple of things. This machine is going to let you know what you're messing up on, okay? So watch what happens if I accidentally forgot to hook my 50 PSI O2 in. All right. It's telling me oxygen not available. So if you're hooked into a wall or you think you are and it's saying this, and you hit reset and it still is there and flashing. This is a high priority one. We think we're setting 40% down here and they're not getting it. You need to make sure that thing's popped on the wall all the way. Okay? It'll still show up, but you can see it's crossed out. I could go ahead and hit reset and we're good there. All right. What happens if we forget to hook up to the wall? So it's hard to see, but you can see down here in this bottom right, you got actual power plug. It shows us I'm charging my battery. If I disconnect, I no longer have a battery light. It's letting me know running on internal battery. And sorry, I know I got a little bit of a screen glare there. This is not exactly the ideal lab for shooting videos in many instances. All right, so what I urge you to do when you're making your initial setup, all right, don't realize this thing is going to be honking and alarming at you, but take a look here, because a lot of the major mistakes that could happen prior to patient connection, if we can't hook the machine up to oxygen or we don't hook it up to power, all right, you might have some problems that can be avoided by just paying attention to what you're doing and looking at the screen here. You can see I do have a battery, so this one wouldn't be a major ordeal. But what if you get tied up and don't come back to that room for a while? Or what if you just drop that patient off and nobody else is paying attention? It could be very serious there, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and plug back on the wall. All right, you can see we're back to charging. I'm going to go ahead, clear that. You see the internal battery stuff is all gone, no oxygen. I still got some low minute ventilation, low tidal volume, which we'll talk about. And I'm back to wall power. All right, to turn this machine in standby, I can hit standby and it says remove mask or disconnect circuit from the ET tube in order, I'm not going to show you how to do that with an ET tube, but you could use this, especially during pandemic type stuff. Simply put, you're just going to have to disconnect from your patient and then it's going to go into standby. Okay, at this point, if we wanted to turn the machine off, you could press and hold that, ventilator shut down, you shut it down here, okay? So that is a quick video on just the circuit, making initial connections, configuring your exhalation port and your mask leak port if you do have one. And those are all essential steps prior to placing this on a patient and knowing about modes and making changes in your settings and things like that, which we'll kind of cover in some other videos here and stuff. So I hope that helps, and a good little refresher if you're worried about setting this thing up, and there'll be more to come. All right, thanks.